Is creatine really safe? I read comments every day saying that creatine destroys your kidneys, it ruins your liver, or that it's simply not good for human consumption. And safety is one of the biggest concerns people have in regard to supplementation in general. So today we're going to look at not one study, not at a blog post, not at your cousin Marvin's opinion, but we're going to look at two of the largest scientific reviews ever done on creatine safety. This video is for education. It's not to encourage anyone to supplement with creatine or not. If you have any concerns about supplementation of any kind as it relates to your health, I recommend discussing it with your doctor, even if you feel like your doctor doesn't know beans about supplementation. Let's start with the first paper. I'll put the link to both of these down in the description below if you want to read them yourself. But this first one, it wasn't a small study. It was a 2017 position stand from the International Society of Sports Nutrition. Now, that means that a large group of researchers reviewed the full body of evidence that was available at the time. Hundreds of studies with athletes, older adults, clinical populations, even children in certain medical settings, and their conclusion was very clear. They found creatine monohydrate to be effective, and when used at recommended doses, they also found it to be safe. They specifically addressed the big fears, the kidneys, the liver, muscle cramps, dehydration, long-term harm potential. They reported that short-term and long-term supplementation, even up to 30 grams per day for up to 5 years in clinical populations, didn't show consistent evidence of harm in healthy individuals. Now, let me pause a second. 30 grams per day is far more than most people would ever take on a regular basis. Most people take the standard research doses of 3 to 5 grams per day, but if high doses used in research settings didn't produce a consistent safety signal, that matters. That's important to know. They also address the kidney issue directly. Creatine can raise blood creatinine. We know that because creatinine is a breakdown product of creatine, but elevation of blood creatinine in the context of creatine supplementation, that doesn't automatically mean kidney damage. That confusion has fueled fear about creatine for decades. But in controlled trials measuring actual kidney function, they didn't find creatine causing renal dysfunction in healthy individuals. They also didn't find evidence that creatine harms the liver. And they made something very clear, that anecdotes aren't data. Now, fast forward to 2025, because if someone says, well, 2017, that's old research. Well, another study came along that was even bigger. This study did something really powerful. It reviewed 685 human clinical trials, over 26,000 participants. Some studies lasted up to 14 years. Most studies used creatine monohydrate. They compared people taking creatine to people taking placebo, and here's what they found. Side effects were reported in 13.2% of placebo studies, and side effects were reported at 13.7% of creatine studies. That difference, statistically meaningless. Creatine didn't produce more side effects than a sugar pill. Now, that's important because placebo isn't supposed to do anything, yet people in placebo groups still report headaches, stomach upset, fatigue, cramps. That's human biology. The researchers then looked even deeper. They evaluated 35 different side effects. They looked at kidney markers, liver enzymes, muscle complaints. They looked at blood and urine markers. They even included a very large long-term Parkinson's study that gave 10 grams per day for up to 8 years. And when they compared creatine to placebo across all these categories, they found no meaningful increase in side effects. A few studies mentioned GI issues or muscle cramping slightly more often in creatine groups, but when they counted the actual number of participants across all studies who experienced these different symptoms, the differences disappeared. In other words, real-world incidence was low and not significantly different from placebo. Now, here's where the 2025 shows its strength. They didn't stop at clinical trials. They analyzed worldwide adverse event databases, 28.4 million reports. How many mentioned creatine in a confirmed way? About 203. That equals 0.00072%. That's extremely small. And nearly half of the US reports that blamed creatine didn't even contain creatine in the product when the researchers reviewed the ingredients. Many others involved multi-ingredient supplements or drugs taken at the same time. So when people say, well, creatine shows up in the adverse event databases, the honest answer is yes, it does, but at an extremely low rate and often without clear clear causation. Now, let's step back a minute and look at some common sense logic. Creatine has been used widely since the early 1990s. Billions and billions of servings consumed by athletes, military, older adults, clinical populations. If creatine were quietly causing widespread kidney failure or liver damage, there is no possible way that would remain hidden for 30 years. Emergency rooms would see it, nephrologists would see it, pathologists would see it, clear obvious patterns would appear over and over, and new dialysis centers would be competing with McDonald's for prime real estate locations. But instead, when researchers review hundreds of trials and even tens of millions of adverse event reports, they don't find that signal. Now, let me add a little balance here. These papers don't say creatine is magic. They don't say everyone should be taking it. They don't say creatine is a cure for cancer. And they do not say that people with known kidney disease should ignore their doctors. What they do say is this: for healthy individuals and more than a few medically managed populations, creatine monohydrate is well tolerated and does not increase the prevalence of side effects compared to placebo. And that is a very strong statement, especially when it's supported by two large scientific reviews 8 years apart. So what does this mean for people aged 50 and above? It means fear shouldn't be the driving decision where supplementation with creatine is concerned. Evidence should be. If you're healthy and you're trying to maintain muscle, strength, and function as you age, creatine is one of the most studied and supported supplements available. If you have chronic kidney disease, complex medical conditions, or you're just unsure if this supplement makes any sense for you, it's important to discuss it with your doctor. That's just being a responsible adult. But the argument or belief that creatine is inherently dangerous simply doesn't match the findings from volumes of research and investigation. 2 major reviews, hundreds of trials, tens of thousands of participants, tens of millions of safety reports, no meaningful increase in side effects compared to placebo. At some point in every debate, the burden of proof shifts. If someone claims creatine is dangerous, they need to show the data that proves that, because the large-scale research available on this topic simply does not support that claim. If you missed this last video on creatine and Alzheimer's, you can check it out next. As always, I appreciate you watching. I hope you'll share this video with someone you feel would benefit from watching it as well. Take care of yourself, stay strong, be well, and I will see you in the next video.